Welcome back to the SampanViking on China channel. Today I'm going to be talking about current developments in the South China Seas and around Taiwan and whether or not American policy towards defending Taiwan has changed. And I start off by saying 2021, what an amazing year for geopolitical anoraks like myself, who like to read the tea leaves, read the runes, and try to understand what really is happening in the world. The plates of geopolitical tectonics are a bit like the plates of geotectonics themselves. They move painfully slowly for long periods of time, and then suddenly there is a massive release, and everything looks very, very different after the aftershocks. And I think we've been seeing this happen this year. We've had to, I think, revise so many opinions over the course of this year, as I suppose, really, as the situation on the ground has sort of cut away many of the hypothetical options that could have existed, many of the permutations. We're still left with a huge number, and in fact new ones as well. But I think we see them more now in a clearer direction than perhaps we did at the beginning of the year, and for many years before that. What has happened so far this year, I think, is a major realignment of US priorities, or the plain to see realignment of US priorities. It has been assumed for a long time, and up until fairly recently, and said on this channel, that the flashpoint was going to be Taiwan, and that there was the prospect of an absolutely massive air-sea battle between the forces of the People's Republic of China and the United States and its erstwhile allies to secure the future of the island, and that in overall balance, it seems as though the United States um, is not going to prevail. And this does seem to be an opinion now held officially by the United States. Although, if you look at the news at the moment, it almost is counterintuitive to say that, because in many respects, the prerequisites for that major air-sea battle seem to be building. There are numerous carrier groups in the uh, vicinity, striking distance of Taiwan. There's about four carrier groups, maybe more, of the US and its allies in and around the China Seas and the Philippine Sea. And the actions of the the People's Liberation Air Force, flying into huge numbers of planes into the Taiwanese air defense identification zone, which incidentally is only an identification zone. A lot of the media are saying air defense zone. It isn't an air defense zone. This is simply a self-declared area of international airspace, which is monitored by a country to identify potentially hostile aircraft flying within it. Every country, most major countries have these. China set up one, incidentally, in the East China Seas a few years ago, and the response of this by the United States was to start flying regular B-52 flights through it. So clearly it is not a violation of territorial airspace, but it is something that is a deliberate act and can be seen as provocative. And there certainly have been items written in the Global Times and other parts of the Chinese media, which rather support that it is being done deliberately to rattle cages, and it is directed principally at another country, or more than one. United States being called the agent of provocativeness in this. But so, yes, on the face of it, you could say, well, it's building up for the big battle. But all the other indications are, the last few weeks, is that America has decided it cannot win the battle. Or even if it wins the battle, the cost of victory and trying to maintain occupation of the island of Taiwan would be too great for it to be viable. This is hardly a surprise. This is right on the doorstep of a major superpower. They would be able to throw everything they had at it, and even if they held the island, it would be at a huge cost. And Taiwan's value as an economic force would be seriously diminished by this, as most of its key infrastructure would very quickly be bombed out of existence. I have no doubt. So America seems to have switched from a policy not of contesting Taiwan, but of targeting instead the trade of China, China's trade, especially its seaborne trade, long distance seaborne trade, and which means that the other discussion that has long been held about the value of the Chinese claim in the South China Seas and its building of bases in the South China Seas, which has always been assumed to be part of, and quite correctly, I think, has always had an element of being part of the containment and recapture of Taiwan, now seems to actually to have a more primal role than that, which is more to do with protecting Chinese sea lanes of control. In other words, ensuring that its trade can move in and out. And this is a complex subject in its own right because it involves a lot of players, not just China, not just the USA. So, leaving the chances of a Taiwanese conflict aside for 1 minute, we have to say, well, okay, America is instead going to target Chinese shipping. The fact that other people have pointed out that they're now talking about Indo-Pacific rather than Asia-Pacific means that they are looking at the trade routes coming from Africa and the Persian Gulf, oil traffic as much as anything, coming into China, as well as the revenue-earning exports leaving it. Well, if anything were to happen, one can only imagine that America and its allies would immediately declare a full trade embargo on China and then seek to interdict any of its remaining trade, export and import. So this tells us a few things straight away. One, it means that the Pacific actually doesn't become the main battleground for this because the moment Canada isn't buying, the moment the United States isn't buying, that is a huge amount of seaborne freight that isn't traveling anymore. And that means it's not going past Japan, it's not going past Korea. So that element of the North Pacific, at least, will become a quiet zone because there's nothing there to attack. This South Pacific is rather more complicated. What would happen with South American countries on the Pacific coast? Would they stop trading or transiting through the Panama Canal into the Atlantic? Who knows? That's a lot more complex. China has a lot of friends in the region. Those friends would undoubtedly come under massive pressure. We would have to wait and see those that succumb and those which do not. If we have an indication of how it would go, I think we can look at the Asia Pacific itself, because America has spent a lot of time and energy over the last year or so trying to recruit by fair means and foul, and by foul means I mean the various protest groups that are actively seeking to overthrow governments that the Americans don't find particularly helpful in their ambitions, but trying to recruit Asian countries to join a NATO of the Asia Pacific in order to contain China. And to date, they have recruited none, which is why the only organization that has appeared in the in the course of the last few months is this AUKUS organization, and even that seems really largely to supply some submarines to Australia in 25 years' time. They'll say, well, in 25 years' time, the West will have these new super weapons. And what do you think the Chinese will have by then, the sunshine? I say, because they are modernizing, expanding, and building their technological base at a massive rate. And with the funds to spend to actually incorporate these into genuine new systems, they seem to be ahead of the game on this, which is why their navy is already bigger than the United States Navy, although the average hull size is smaller. In 25 years' time, that is still likely to be the case, only the hulls are far bigger and the ships far more capable of going into the deep ocean. And not just to go into the deep ocean, obviously they can do that, but to go into the deep ocean under conflict conditions and win, which is what they mean by that. So, what now happens? We now see sort of the prospect of convoys sailing from East Africa, sailing from the Persian Gulf, etc., going through the Straits of Malacca and fighting off Western raiders. That seems to be the image that's coming out. How you get there, though, is another matter. How does the United States trigger this situation. And I will come back to SLOC matters a little bit later, but I think I should deal with this first. This has been a subject of some discussion over the last few days on Sino Defence Forum, on which I'm not as active member as I ought to be nowadays, but I have been involved in it for a very, very long time, and it is a very good website when it comes to Chinese military. I keep plugging it at the end of each video. I'll plug it again here mid-video. Do come and check it out if you're interested. A lot of people there do actually know what they're talking about, and it is one of the few non-Western centric websites on the English-speaking web. So you will learn a lot from it. So how do we get to the situation where the US can actually enforce this embargo? Because simply waiting for China to invade Taiwan and say that's our justification is a bit of a forlorn hope. They're not going. The Chinese government is highly unlikely to do something which it knows is going to trigger this massive response if it doesn't need to, and it wouldn't need to because Taiwan is going to say, well, nobody's going to defend us. We're just being hung out as bait for the dragon. Um, we're not going to play ball. We're not going to do anything that would provoke an invasion of the island. So we get a standoff there with the status quo, which is no use to the United States. They need a provocation. Now, as I said before, the danger always is that if the Americans can convince the Chinese that they are going to get into a position where Taiwan can declare independence and they are prepared to fight, that the Chinese would take a preemptive strike against the island before those forces have a chance to properly uh, um, consolidate themselves to be able to form that type of effective resistance, if at all any effective resistance now is indeed possible. But why would Taiwan go around with this? It involves them being, being invaded. Unless we're talking about the DPP leadership being paid huge sums of money to sell their country down the river, and they get out quick, a bit like the Afghan president. But that's a tall. I mean, I wouldn't put it past the United States to try that, but it is a tall. That is a tall order. That is a long shot by any stretch of the imagination. Um, Somehow they would have to pull a very, very good trick that would convince everybody that the balloon was about to go up. But even then, if it doesn't go up and the Americans, try to enforce the embargo, declare an embargo and try to enforce it, you then get a very upset Taiwan who've realized they've been thrown under the bus. A nonplussed China who haven't done anything, and you then get officials from Taipei and Beijing sitting down and saying, we have no intention of starting a fight, of going to war, because any government that supported, the US, who then got stabbed in the back in this way, isn't long for this world. So I think you'd be looking at a KMT government in Taiwan very, very quickly after America did that, and they'd simply say, well, we're working towards closer ties. We're certainly not going to go to war. We have no idea what the United States is talking about. It's only talking for itself, which isn't going to garner much public international support, which I think is the big problem they've got anyway, because they can't get other people to. So, in Liberty, I don't know how they can engineer the situation when they can do it. Doubtless, they have very talented people who are very good at lying, cheating, and stealing, aka Pompeo, but I don't see how they can manipulate a situation against experienced intelligence officers on all sides into fooling the governments that the balloon is about to go up and they take precipitous action that justifies the American reaction. It is difficult to see, and even a false one, because it depends on the injured party still playing along when it clearly has no interest in doing so. But it does then bring us back to the rest of the region. No Asian country, Asia Pacific country, has shown the slightest interest in getting involved in a kinetic anti-Chinese adventure. Not the Vietnam, not the Philippines, not Indonesia, not Malaysia, not Thailand, and that's the main ones. South Korea might be, but I think they're paying lip service. They'd be far more worried about if the balloon goes up being attacked by North Korea Japan, well, they're quite a way out of it. I think, again, they're paying lip service, and recent political changes there probably reflect the fact that they're not really that interested and have no interest. And without trade heading in that direction, there's no reason for them to get involved anyway. And let's face it, America dropped 2 atom bombs on them. They're not exactly going to go to rush to help the people that did that to them and took away their empire. So Japan likely is nodding and smiling and has absolutely no intention of doing anything, in my humble opinion. Same with further afield. India, well, at the Quad meetings recently, they danced the dance, but they showed very little interest in joining an actual anti-Chinese alliance, and for fairly obvious reasons. Despite them being at the point where Chinese shipping is at its most vulnerable, going through the Indian Ocean, it is also a country that has a land border with China. So whilst it might get involved in damaging Chinese shipping, it would be very, very vulnerable to a Chinese land and air war coming in from the Tibetan plateau, which they would give them the casus belli to do if they started attacking Chinese or being in any way assisting the attacks on Chinese shipping in the Indian Ocean. So India itself has a lot to lose. It realizes that a war in the Indo-Pacific starts to look around the Indian Ocean, starts to look at India, and starts to look like a war in its territory. And what does it get out of this other than a warm, fuzzy feeling at being invited to Uncle Sam's table? In other words, not much. I can't see them doing it. No other country. Pakistan, well, obviously not. Indian ally. They'd probably take advantage of the situation to try to reclaim the rest of Kashmir. They'd have their own war with India. Myanmar, it's got its own problems. It's got no interest in attacking China. Bangladesh, very good terms with China. Ceylon, Sri Lanka rather, very, very good terms with China. When you look at them, the relations and the trade, how it all stacks up, follow the money, as people say, and you will see that most of the people have they might sort of tut-tut on the sidelines, if at most, but they've got absolutely no intention of getting involved in US adventurism against China. So this comes to another possible scenario with this, and that as the only people interested in this seem to be the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia. That's, as somebody put it so succinctly on Sino Defence the other day, a very pink coalition, and very pink in an area which is noticeably yellow, and in which yellow is noticeably absent. It doesn't bode well for any attempts to try to achieve anything. There would be no local support and quite probably local hostility, which rather means that the entire thing would become very, very difficult to maintain at all. It's one thing to do it in a permissive environment. When it becomes a confrontational environment, it becomes something else. Singapore, key country, little city-state for control of the Malacca Straits. I can't see them. If they have to choose, they'll probably go with China, especially if the rest of the region isn't joining up. They're not going to stand out alone. Um, at the end of the day, they're all East Asians, and the other countries are European interlopers. Then it's difficult to see how they would decide when the balloon really does go up, and it comes down to the real red line. There's no going back from that. They're going to go with the Anglos against their own. I just don't see it. So what really do we have here? Is it just smoke and mirrors again from the United States, as we had with Afghanistan? And in fact, what we're looking at is a pullback, probably in stages, as far as Hawaii, in the hope that China will be taken up so much with local disputes, they all start squabbling with themselves in East Asia, that they get tied up there for decades and decades and decades to come. Well, maybe that is the case, and maybe there are other options, factors to play in this as well, relating to fundamentals for the US economy, which may not be that great, and the cost of maintaining a military that can't actually achieve very much in terms of containing China against its territorial waters. Well, there we are. Again, a rather longer video than I was intending to do, but it's a big subject. I'm sure I've missed a lot out, and I'm sure I've skirted over a lot of the items, and I might need to come back in the not too distant future to look at this again. Well, almost certainly, because the situation seems to be changing by the hour. I just hope that this doesn't go out saying there's nothing to worry about just as the bombs start falling on Taipei. Oh, that would just be my luck. Anyway, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like. If you do not subscribe to this channel, please do. It's free and it helps this channel to grow. If you would like others to listen to what I have to say, hit the share button. And if you would like to comment or ask a question, please leave a comment and I will answer as where appropriate as best I can. Thank you very much, and I hope you all join me for the next video.